I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Eben Bolter, BSc, Director of Photography on The Last of Us. Eben, you're credited with lensing episodes 3, 4, and 5 of this huge blockbuster on HBO. And so you were a huge part of what many in the industry considered to be the highlight episode, though, of the entire TV season, episode 3. Beautiful, tragic, post-apocalyptic, queer romance. What were your initial reactions when you read the script?
Yeah. Well, it was a script that was so complete, a lot of the time, we get scripts and it's a second draft and there's going to be rewrites and maybe we're going to change this dialogue and maybe this scene's going to happen. And episode 3 was probably the most complete script I've ever read. When I read it for the first time, it was just like when you watched it for the first time. The experience was so incredibly similar. So it was probably immediate. I cried. I can say I cried the first time I read it. And I was absolutely blown away that they had honored the source material so well to this point and in this episode, but also expanded on it in such an interesting way that was so incredibly moving and told this new story in a new way. And so instantly I was in love with it. I wanted the job. I didn't have the job yet. So this huge sort of weight came over me of the sort of responsibility and opportunity of what this script gave us, because there's an opportunity there to make something incredibly special. But there's also the responsibility to not mess it up. So, long story short, I did get the job and I did start prepping this script with the director, Peter Hoare. And that was so many of our conversations, me and Peter would be, we just need to do what the script says. It's such an instruction manual for greatness. We just need to pull off, because it's one thing to sort of say in a script that a thing happens and words can manipulate you in a certain way. But when the audience aren't going to read those words, we need to make that manipulation happen through images, through score, through performance. So it was just always about, let's make sure we're not missing anything. We're not missing any story. We're not missing any of the details. And we're giving our actors the best opportunity possible to flourish in these roles and to convey this story to the audience. So yeah, I've lived with the script now for probably 2 years, if you know what I mean, from when I first read it to where I am today. And I still have like a 1% anxiety that something's going to go wrong. Like even, the casting process, it was like, wow, that's special. Like seeing the locations, building the sets, it was like, wow, okay, this is good. And then you come to the shoot, you start shooting, and it was every day by day, it was like, oh, I think this is going really well. But you're just always, you're pushing that boulder up the hill, and more and more people are helping you push the boulder, but you're just sort of waiting for something, for the boulder to disappear. You're just like, it's such a sort of interesting thing we do, that you take this written word and you turn it into a TV program. And there are so many steps and so many people along the way, and so many outside influences, things like the writer's strike right now. There are things that you just can't control and that could have affected what we did. So yeah, really, I'm just so relieved and humbled to be a part of this thing and for it to have happened and to people have responded so well.
And the interesting thing is, like, you've been sitting with this, as you say, for such a long time, and it finally airs. And I know for a fact that you had so much anticipation for what people were going to think, because you knew that it was good, and you knew people were going to lose their minds over it. So talk me through those few days, particularly on social media and your colleagues, friends, and family. What were you hearing, and how did you feel when you realized, yeah, people love this just as much as I do?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing again of just about the sort of the prism of how you view work. And I had that first reading of the script, and that was my like pure experience of this story. From that stage onwards, I'm helping to create it. So I'm in the nitty-gritty of it. So you do lose a bit of perspective. So I always had that memory of how great this is. And day by day, I was like, I think this is great. And then when I saw the first the rough edit, Timothy Good, our editor, he showed me the rough cut before lots of things had happened, and it was easily the best I'd ever seen in terms of a rough cut. Usually a rough cut can be relatively soul destroying because, you know, they leave lots of things like
Yeah.
it's saggy, and it, you know, the
Mm.
music isn't done yet and the VFX aren't done yet, and there can be a lot of things where you think, oh, it's not as great as I thought it was. But this, it was like, oh god, I really think this is great. So then, yeah, you've got that thing of, I was like, I think we've done something quite special here, but again, it's not real until other people tell me it's special. It's one thing for me to say, I think we've done this great episode of TV, but it's kind of like, yeah, okay, everyone thinks everything's great. So um, it was so gratifying. I'm on Twitter, and Twitter's an incredible, you know, platform for something like this to happen, where you can just read people's uh, opinions and, you know, feedback without any sort of, you know, sometimes it's a bad thing, but with any sort of constraint.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're not writing their feedback for me or for the creators, they're writing it for their followers, and they're just saying, you know, this is rubbish or this is great.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to see all of that and to go on that journey, and just to have people send me messages. And I was lucky enough I was able to screen episode 3 in a cinema for in the UK for sort of, it was kind of a press slash friends and family screening. So it's about 200 people in the audience.
Wow.
And, you know, hearing all, you know, that collective thing in a cinema, it played so well as just a movie basically, and hearing and feeling everyone being moved. And then being on stage for a Q&A at the end and looking at the faces and everyone's wiping away tears. It was incredibly moving, gratifying.
That's yeah.
Yeah, I still can't believe it's real again.
That's so cool.
Mm,
When I spoke to Murray Bartlett, you know,
mm,
he said he gave, I mean, he had a lot of really interesting things to say, but one thing that comes to mind is he gave a lot of credit to Peter, the director, and you, particularly, he mentioned about the just how you were both able to really set the scene, pardon the pun, on set for Nick and Murray to really kind of work their magic with their, you know, with their chemistry. And I'm just wondering if you can recall back when you were shooting this episode, particularly in those really intimate moments between the two of them, maybe at the dining table or at the piano. Do you recall what it
mm.
was like on set with the two of them? Was it a jovial place to be? Was it really hushed? What was it like?
Yeah, it was a very empathetic set. That was the main thing. I think everyone knew that we've got a great script here, a great story here, and we're doing something important and sensitive by showing this story to an audience who may not normally see stories like this. So we also had the added element of you know, Nick being a straight man in real life and Murray being a gay man, that making sure that the environment for Nick in particular was as safe as possible. We wanted him to just feel so supported and yeah, just, you know, seen by everyone. You know,
Yeah.
Peter, the director, of the gay man, and he could guide him, and Murray was guiding him, and it was all just about, you know, scene by scene, what's important here, what's the story, what are we trying to convey, what's the most important thing. And it's something as a cinematographer that I do think about a lot. I'm not a cinematographer who has my own signature style, and it's like, that's what I do, and I'll do that on everything, and everyone get out of my way because this is how I'm going to shoot it. I try to react to what every job is. So something like Avenue 5 that we spoke about a long time ago was comedy. So it's all about multi-camera, letting cross-shooting, you know, tons of coverage, let the comedy happen. Then I just did a Marvel show where it's much more precise, it's much more cinematic, it's much more about lighting and camera trickery, and you know, that becomes more of the focus. But yeah, The Last of Us was scene by scene. Okay, this is a scene where it's going to be, let's say that when the raiders come, and it's raining and we've got fire and we've got lightning, and it's a very technical exercise, and how to make it look that way, it requires lots of lighting, and sort of the camera and the lighting are, you know, at the forefront of what we're doing. Then there are scenes like the strawberry patch, where it's all about sensitivity, it's all about performance, it's all about just giving them that space to do what they do, and frankly staying out of the way. And another example is the piano scene, where um, we the actors were capable of playing piano and singing and doing that whole scene like a play. So Peter and I said, well, this is perfect opportunity to let them do that, and let's get as much coverage as possible. So we had like a Nick camera, a Murray camera, and a 2-shot, and we cross shot, and those 3 cameras were all running, and we could play that whole scene as one long take, which gave maximum performance and sensitivity. And if Nick did something slightly new or slightly different and Murray reacted a certain way, we're seeing both things. We're not having to recreate anything.
Yeah.
Now, had I approached that as, okay, I'm a cinematographer, this is how I work, I want to light it like this, I just want to shoot one shot at a time, maybe the lighting would have been a tiny bit better, but the performances in the scene would have been so much worse, because it would have been the wrong approach for a scene like that.
Yeah.
So that's my point, really, is just scene by scene, we really tried to just be empathetic to what's the story here, what's the focus. And it was my job some of the time to just step down, stay out of the way, and let them perform. And I think that created an atmosphere on set of just sort of warmth. It was a very warm, very loving, very happy, very moving set. Something like that piano scene. When we finished take 1, I will always remember, the door where all the, producer, showrunner, everyone behind the scenes just streamed into the room with just tears running down their face, and everyone just started hugging everyone. It was crazy because it was just so moving,
Yeah.
and that's what it just meant a lot to a lot of people. And the experience of making it was similar to the experience of watching it. I think it just sort of opened up this kind of love. Yeah.
It did. And we're talking about a post-apocalyptic zombie action drama that's based on a video game. And this episode, the way you're talking about it, it doesn't even sound like we're talking about the same show. And yet you're able to achieve something so beautiful. I love the scene, by the way, at the dining table. It's lit by the light from the outside. It filters through those curtains, and then they move into the piano room. And it was warm, and that's the one thing that I will always have in my head months later. So it's just beautiful. I totally agree that it's such a highlight of the work. Eben, I must say, I'm going to put you on the spot a little, because I know you say out of the way, you don't have the particular style, but this show boasts a really cohesive, consistent look and feel throughout the season. And even though all 4 DPs worked relatively independently with each block of episodes, I still feel like it revealed some really interesting stylistic choices. I'm wondering what does Eben Bolter bring to the table as an artist that you were hoping to inject into the show's visual aesthetic?
That's a nice question. I think I've always been a cinematographer who, again, empathy. I try to be empathetic. I don't try to take over. I try to listen. I'm not a DP who comes to a director. Like, I'm interviewing for shows at the moment, and I don't do a lot of prep for interviews. I like to ask questions and listen, because a script has usually existed for a year or half a year before I've read it, and a director's been on a project for a long time before I start talking to them. And I want to catch up. I want to get into their head. What do you want this to be? What's the subtext in the script that I might have missed? And I want to sort of collect all this information, and then I want to sort of translate that into real images and offer options and offer new ideas to embellish and maybe improve. And that's how I kind of view my job. And one side of that, in terms of my personal taste, which obviously does exist, I've never liked lighting that feels fake or feels lit. I always want light to make sense. Okay, it's a daytime scene and there are windows, and the windows are on that side of the room, so the light should come from that direction and not from that direction. As simple as that. Just basic sort of science. Basic, like, if ever I'm kind of saying, what's that light? And sometimes in sort of glossy studio American stuff, you get all this like light everywhere. Like, people are walking around with like a kind of fashion shoot photography lighting hovering around them, if you know what I'm saying. And that is something I find difficult to do. It is difficult to do. I don't want to completely discredit it, and it's not to my taste. So what a kind of thing that I've always, I guess, leaned towards is cinematic naturalism. It's how can I take the real world and the practical limitations of a space and turn that into a cinematic image. So on The Last of Us, it was a really wonderful opportunity to do that, because that fits into Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann's style as well. They didn't want it to feel too lit. They didn't want it to feel too fake. If ever it was a case of that feels like a big movie light, it was like, well, let's turn it off, you know? And that was kind of the thing. It was make it feel almost like a documentary, but that just the situation we've created is incredibly cinematic. So a lot of that would be, you know, almost every single scene in The Last of Us is a set, pretty much. You know, there are very few locations because of the 20 years of de-aging. You know, you can't just walk into any old location and shoot. You've got to do so much work to it. You might as well build it as a set. So Bill and Frank's house was a soundstage, and the exterior we built as a like a backlot thing in a forest. So both completely fake, and then the job becomes make it feel like a real location and make it feel seamless. You know, at no point did I want it to ever feel like we're on a soundstage. So it was a case of lighting through windows, trying to emulate the real world and what would really be happening on location. And quite often what does happen on location is you don't have full control. So you can't put you can't put the sun in the perfect spot and it just be there. And, you know, like you have to kind of concede a little bit and go, okay, the sun's kind of good. Let's go, let's shoot. It's not perfect, but let's go. So I tried to bring a bit of that to the soundstage. So not making things perfect, making things real and as close as I could get to perfect without crossing that line into fake. It's just a little dance you have to do, and so often it's less is more. So that the table scene where they're sat at either end of the table and for the first meal, I knew I wanted, you know, I work with the art department. You know, John Pano, our amazing designer, was very sensitive to light and to lighting and where we might need sources. And we had the room worked out in a way where I could sort of backlight them from the windows, but I didn't cheat. I picked where the sun was. I made sure it was coming in at a kind of interesting angle and hitting the white tablecloth, which then turned the white tablecloth into a kind of glowing source as well. But, you know, on other jobs, maybe every single shot, I'd be tweaking that position of the sun to make it perfect for every shot. Whereas on this, I didn't. I was like, that's it. Let's just leave it. And let's look at Murray and let's look at Nick. Basically no tweaks, just light the room and then shoot the scene. And that gives you, hopefully, cinematic naturalism.
Yeah, and that's precisely why in the moments in episode 5, for example, you know, when we're seeing clickers and bloaters and they're running for their lives, you're lighting things by flame, by torch. And in this episode, you're lighting by the outside light source, the sun, and it makes me feel more scared or more compassionate. It makes me feel more immersed. And I think so much of that is because of your work. Very briefly, because we're running out of time, but with all of that being said, and your touches of like Emmanuel Lubezki's Working Children of Men and things like that, you and I have talked at length about our favorite cinematographers, but that final shot outside the window just completely took my breath away. Briefly, I know that's, you know, based on the video game, but what were your thoughts with the way that turned out? Everyone talks about it.
I love that shot too. That was something Peter and I were pitching early on as an idea. So it is a bit of a long story. I'll do it as briefly as I can. And Craig's already talked about this elsewhere, but originally he wanted to have a window shot for every episode. And so when you click on HBO Max or whatever your service is, it would be episode 1, and there'd almost be like a holding page, like a screensaver for episode 1, and it would have a window from the show. And you'd, you know, press play and it would play the episode. So we actually shot some of those for various episodes. But Peter and I, we were saying, okay, in this episode, well, surely it has to be a window from Bill and Frank's house. That's the main house. That's going to be the window. But if we show it at the beginning, it's kind of meaningless, really, because people won't know where it is, where it is until the end. And then we started to think about what room would it be, and maybe it's their final room, and maybe there's a picture on the wall. But we also wanted, you know, at the end of the episode, Joel and Ellie are driving off into the sunset. So we didn't want to completely leave that behind. So then we had the idea of, okay, they could be driving off into the sunset, and then we could track back through the window as a reminder of the story that we've left behind and tie it all together. And that kind of gives us this thematic feeling that you felt yourself. But it also gives the bookend to the episode, that we're sort of saying, here's the window at the beginning, it doesn't mean anything to you, and here's the winding at the end, and now you understand what it means. So that was the original idea, to sort of show it twice,
Yeah.
once just stationary and once with that move through. And so that's how we shot it. And then during the editing process, as Craig has said, they got rid of the idea of the windows at the beginning. But luckily, and it really is luck, we had shot that shot for that idea, and it still worked on its own. So it's one of those cases of we got a bit lucky, I think, that we were taken down that path by Craig and by this window idea. We made that shot, and then it survived into the final edit. And yeah, I love it too. It's just one of those, it moves you in such an interesting way, I think, because it's all to do with memory. It's all to do with a reminder of what you've just seen. And that, I don't know, it just sort of touches something, a nerve.
It does.
So yeah.
And because we're here looking out the window and we know who's just behind us, and it just, it really is special. Eben, I could talk to you about this episode all day, but I really appreciate your time today, and congratulations on some beautiful work in the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.